World Athletics has banned transgender women who have gone through male puberty from competing in female international events.
The governing body's president, former British Olympic champion Lord Coe, said the decision had been taken to protect the female category in our sport. But opponents say it discriminates against trans women. Here's what he told Good Morning Britain.
We're talking about athletes who fundamentally have male biology competing in a category against biological women. And I'm afraid that is just, really does not fit the definition of a fair playing field.
So, is it right for transgender women to be banned from track and field female events? Well, joining us to discuss this is football journalist Alison Bender, who says that biological differences make it unfair for trans women to compete in women's sport. And broadcaster India Willoughby, who says the idea that trans women aren't on a level playing field is nonsense. So, India, I'm going to come to you first. What you heard Lord Coe say there, that this is going to lead to a biologically born woman, or however we best describe that, somebody that that went through female puberty, didn't go through male puberty. It'll lead to them never winning an event. What do you make of that?
Well, apologies, first of all. I sound like a broken Austin Allegro this morning, so apologies for that. But it's absolute nonsense, I'm afraid, Kate. When you look at the actual stats in the record books, trans women have been allowed to compete in professional sport since the 1970s. Rennie Richards at Wimbledon, so in the Olympics since 2004. And during that time, we're now, 50 years, half a century, there has never been a pro-trans champion. And I remember actually, funnily enough, being on your show almost a year ago to the day when we were talking about Leah Thomas, the American swimmer, the college swimmer who'd won a race. And the story was that Leah was trashing women's sport, destroying it. Well, 2 days later, there were two 16-year-olds, Bella Sims and Kate Grimes, who actually broke her record by 1.5 seconds. So the idea that it's not a level playing field is just rubbish. And, the worst thing about this actually is the gaslighting from Lord Coe. He's saying there that he won't object if somebody doesn't go through male puberty, or at least that's what he infers. So does that mean that Sebastian Coe is in favour of allowing trans people to transition earlier? Of course not. He would absolutely object to that. So this, make no mistake, this is a trans ban. It's effectively sports apartheid, and having this separate category, effectively saying, yeah, we're going to include you, we're being inclusive, but you go play over there, not with the rest of us. I'm sorry, that's not inclusion.
OK, let's put that to Alison. It's a really important point that India is making. The reality is there has been trans athletes since, well, she's going back 50-odd years, and none of them have won major medals in the Olympics, certainly. And the example she just gave of the American swimmer was beaten a couple of days later by two 16-year-olds. Actually, as a playing field, it is relatively fair.
Yeah, I don't really think that is the full argument, though, to be honest with you. And I know that India does make that point clearly. And India, I just have to say before we go into this, I did read your tweet about this being the biggest sporting scandal, how the trans community feels completely sidelined. And I have to agree with you, there's been some really negative messaging in the press about the trans community lately. And so I'd like to try and hopefully address this debate for what it is, because ultimately it's a debate between whether fairness is more important or inclusivity is more important. Now, I accept that a trans woman is a woman and should be treated that way. And I would like to see trans women feel very comfortable in society. But as a sports journalist, I also believe in integrity of the sporting competition. Now, to your point that there haven't been many athletes, winning and competing, in fact, against the trans women competing against the men. That's not to say that there won't be in the future. I mean, we're seeing that we're a much more inclusive society for the trans community. More people will be transitioning, and you put rules in place for that very reason, so that people, obviously, you know, entering that community will be able to come into a sporting competition. Now, I have to admit, there is no simple answer to this. Do you have them compete against males? Absolutely not, because they are not males. Do you have them in their own category, which I know seems a little unfair? But the only other alternative I see is looking at case by case, which I think can be really damaging. I think in many ways that can be seen as a violation of human rights. Some trans athletes might say, looking at testosterone levels, looking at whether, I mean, I know in 2015 in the Olympics, it was whether you'd actually, you know, had full surgery. And that can be, you know, an extra layer that trans people don't want to go through, because I know that life is tough already. So this is all about trying to understand what makes it fair for all, and it is about elite level as well. I know some people think it filters all the way through to youth level, but I think this is about integrity of elite competition.
India, how would you like to see this resolved? What would you say is the answer? Because it's a sensitive subject and we're all very aware that we don't want to say something that perhaps would be seen to be sort of, you know, insulting in any way. And we want to try and make this fair. We want to make it that inclusion. But I think it's a really good point you make that actually setting up their own category is not including trans athletes. Yeah,
and I think that's really good points that have been said there. By everyone so far in this discussion. But just to go back to the fairness aspect, I repeat, the stats just do not suggest any unfairness is happening anywhere. And inclusivity doesn't mean that the number of trans people are going to increase, no more than it would the including gay people doesn't mean that more people are going to identify as gay. So going forward, I think the answer actually is, and this is where I'm really annoyed with Lord Coe, because he knows all this information and it's all getting buried. There was a study in 2021, which was published in the British Sports Medical Journal, and that was a study by Dr. Roberts, who'd monitored 70 trans athletes over the space of 2 years and how they performed athletically during their transition. And it found that after a year, which is the current guidelines for sport, that male to female still retained some advantage. But if you expanded that barrier from 1 year transition onto 2 years, then he said, these are his words, he said there was no difference at all in athletic performance.
So would you then suggest that they didn't compete for a longer period? Because I'm wondering if maybe the argument might be from trans athletes at that point that they're being excluded from potentially their best competitive years. You know, it sort of presents another problem, doesn't it?
Yeah,
do you mind if I just interject, India?
Sorry, I just make one really quick point. One really quick point. If Sebastian Coe had been Sabrina Coe and had been on hormones for 2 years, he would not have won gold in Moscow.
I just wanted to say one thing, because it's very hard to interject, obviously, on Zoom. But and by the way, I've read so many of the studies because I wanted to be as educated as possible on this matter. It's not my area, to be honest with you. And obviously, India, you'll know so much more about it. But I did read some studies. There was a distance runner, Joanna Harper, who did a study of athletes and noticed that if they'd been, you know, suppressing their testosterone levels for around a year, she found a 10% drop in, you know, in speed, basically, in ability. And she said that 10 to 12% was a very crucial number because that was the difference between male and female elite athletes. But what I would say, having read all of this science, is just the common sense aspect. The fact that, yes, of course, you know, we hear about hormones, we hear about this, but if a female-born person has gone through, sorry, a male-born person has gone through male puberty, we all know about these spikes in testosterone, the fact that there's, you know, greater body mass, greater height, greater strength, greater power, more lean body mass. And I think for female athletes, it must be incredibly hard to keep that, you know, that fat off, and that's an advantage that men will have. I'm just trying to find a way that female athletes will feel that it's fair to them, because I do think you have to look at science and common sense in tandem. And I think one thing is that Lord Coe did say that he is reviewing the matter scientifically. They've put this ban in place until they're able to get more information, which I think can only be a good thing, and it shows that they're taking the trans community very seriously.
Yeah.
You think he's lying? You don't think they'll look at the science?
I do. I think he's basically kicking this problem down the road, and he's obviously taken advice. He doesn't want to end up in the court of sporting arbitration, being accused of banning trans people, specifically trans women. So instead of banning trans women, he's effectively going to rename the men's category an open category and expect trans women to compete there. And a trans woman is not going to compete there. You know, it's humiliating. A trans woman will stand no more chance in the men's category than a cis woman would. And it's just smoke and mirrors. You know, he is ideologically opposed to trans people in sport, and he won't do any further investigation.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but we do appreciate both your thoughts this morning. Really interesting discussion. Thank you, Alison, and thank you, India, as ever. Great to have you both on the programme.